Have you ever finished praying with tears in your eyes, promising God with all your heart that you would never return to that same sin again, only to find yourself falling back into it just days later? And when it happens again, the pain is not just the mistake itself. The real pain is the crushing thought that maybe something is deeply wrong inside you because you truly hate the sin. You fight it, you pray about it, you ask God to change you. And yet the battle inside your heart keeps returning like a storm that refuses to disappear. Slowly, a dangerous voice begins whispering inside your mind, telling you that maybe real Christians do not struggle like this. Maybe people who truly belong to God would not keep falling the same way. And the longer the struggle continues, the more you start wondering if God is becoming tired of hearing the same apology, the same prayer, and the same promise again and again. But what if the very fact that you hate your sin this deeply is actually evidence that God has not left you at all? Many believers carry a quiet belief deep in their hearts that if someone truly loves God, the struggle with sin should disappear quickly and life should become spiritually clean almost overnight. The man in our story believed this too, even though no one had ever clearly told him that this is how faith works. Over time, this idea slowly grew inside his mind until it became the standard by which he judged his entire spiritual life. So every time he failed again, he did not just feel regret about the mistake itself. He felt something deeper that was harder to explain. It was the painful feeling that maybe he was disappointing God in a way that other believers somehow were not. The more often the struggle returned, the more he began questioning whether his faith was even real. He would listen to sermons and hear confident believers talk about victory, discipline, and living a transformed life. Their voices sounded peaceful and certain, as if the battle against temptation had already been won long ago. Meanwhile, inside his own heart, the experience felt very different, because the battle had not disappeared at all. Some days he would take a long walk just to clear his mind and think about everything he was feeling. The wind would move gently through the trees while he quietly asked himself the same difficult question again and again. If he truly loved God, then why did the same weakness keep returning to his life? There was something else that confused him even more when he thought about it honestly. Before he began caring deeply about God, he had done many wrong things without feeling this intense weight of guilt afterward. Back then, he could ignore his behavior and move on with life without thinking too much about it. But now something inside him had clearly changed in a way he could not fully explain. Every time he fell into the same sin, his heart reacted immediately with sadness and discomfort. The silence after the mistake felt heavier than anything he had experienced before. For a long time, he believed this pain was proof that his faith was weak and unstable. He thought the struggle itself meant he was somehow failing God more than other believers did. That belief slowly created discouragement inside him and made the battle feel even harder to fight. But one quiet evening, while sitting beside his window, watching the sky slowly turn orange and gold, a different thought entered his mind for the first time. What if the pain he felt after sinning was not proof that God had abandoned him, but proof that his heart was slowly becoming more alive? The thought stayed with him long after the sun disappeared and the room slowly filled with evening shadows. For the first time, he began wondering if his struggle might mean something different than what he had always assumed. Instead of being proof that his faith was weak, maybe the struggle itself was evidence that something inside his heart had truly changed. He began remembering a time in his life when sin did not bother him nearly as much as it does now. Back then, he could make a mistake, shrug it off, and move on with his day without feeling the deep inner discomfort he feels today. Something inside him had clearly become more sensitive than before. That realization slowly changed the way he looked at his struggle. The pain he felt after sinning was not the pain of someone who loved the darkness. It was the pain of someone who now wanted the light, but was still learning how to walk toward it. And that is when something powerful becomes clear in the Christian journey. People who truly belong to God often feel the battle with sin more deeply than they did before faith ever entered their lives. The heart begins waking up, and suddenly things that once felt normal start feeling heavy. Before caring about God, many people simply follow their desires without much resistance. But when faith begins to grow inside a person, a quiet conflict appears between the old habits of the past and the new desires forming in the heart. This conflict can feel exhausting at times because it happens inside the same mind and the same heart. One part of the person wants to move closer to God, while another part still feels pulled toward familiar patterns and weaknesses. The man slowly realized that the very reason he hated his sin so deeply now was because something inside him had changed. If his heart had remained the same as before, the sin would not disturb him this much. And that realization created a small but important shift inside his thinking. Instead of seeing the struggle as proof that he was failing God, he began wondering if the struggle might actually be part of the transformation God was slowly working inside him. As that thought continued growing in his mind, the man began looking at his struggle from a completely different angle. For years, he believed that falling into the same sin meant he was moving further away from God. But now, he slowly began wondering if the real story might actually be more complicated than that. He started noticing something about his heart that had changed over time. Before faith became important to him, he rarely stopped to question his behavior or examine his choices. Life moved quickly, and most mistakes passed by without much thought or reflection. But now things were different in a way he could no longer ignore. The moment he did something wrong, his heart reacted almost immediately with regret, discomfort, and the deep desire to turn back toward God. That reaction itself began to tell him something important. A heart that truly does not care about God rarely feels this kind of inner conflict. People who are completely comfortable with their sin usually do not spend nights praying, worrying, and asking God for help. In fact, the struggle itself can sometimes be the clearest evidence that a spiritual change has already begun. When light enters a dark room, it reveals things that were always there, but were previously hidden in the shadows. The man realized that his hatred toward the sin had grown stronger over time. Even though he still struggled with it, he no longer felt comfortable living with it the way he once did. There was a time when he could justify the behavior or pretend it was not a big problem. But now his heart refused to ignore it, and that inner resistance kept bringing him back to prayer again and again. For the first time, he started considering a quiet possibility that had never crossed his mind before. What if the battle he was experiencing was not proof that God had abandoned him, but proof that God was still patiently shaping him? The more the man thought about it, the more he began realizing that spiritual growth rarely happens in a straight and perfect line. Many people imagine faith as a quick transformation where the past disappears instantly and every habit changes overnight. But real change in the human heart often happens slowly, quietly, and through many small steps that take time to understand. He began remembering something he once heard in a sermon that he had almost forgotten. The Christian life is often described as a journey rather than a single moment of arrival. A journey means movement, learning, stumbling at times, and standing back up again. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine that God might not be surprised by his struggle. Perhaps the Creator who understands every human heart already knew that growth would take patience and time. This thought slowly removed some of the heavy pressure he had been placing on himself for years. Instead of believing that one failure meant everything was ruined, he began seeing the battle as part of a longer story still unfolding. He also began noticing something important about his behavior after each failure. Even though he stumbled, he always found himself returning to God again, asking for help, asking for forgiveness, and asking for strength to try again. That return itself revealed something meaningful about the direction of his heart. If he truly wanted to abandon God, he would have stopped praying a long time ago and simply accepted the sin as normal. Instead, every struggle kept leading him back to the same place of quiet conversation with God. It was almost as if the weakness itself was slowly teaching him humility, dependence, and the need for grace. And slowly, he began to understand something that many believers discover only after years of walking with faith. God is not only present in moments of strength and victory. Sometimes, He is working most deeply in the middle of the struggle itself. That evening, the man sat quietly by his window, long after the sky had turned dark and the world outside had become still. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of the wind brushing against the glass. And for the first time in a long while, his thoughts were not filled with panic or shame. He was beginning to understand something that had taken years of struggle to see clearly. The battle he was fighting did not automatically mean his faith was weak or fake. In many ways, the struggle itself revealed that his heart still cared deeply about living differently. If he truly did not care about God anymore, the guilt would have disappeared long ago. He would have stopped praying, stopped reflecting, and simply accepted the sin as a normal part of his life. But instead, every failure kept leading him back to the same quiet place of conversation with God. Slowly, he realized that change rarely happens through one perfect moment of strength. Real transformation often grows through many small decisions to stand back up after falling and to keep turning the heart toward God again and again. The journey of faith is not about never stumbling. It is about refusing to stop walking. It is about choosing hope over despair and remembering that God's patience is far greater than our fear of failure. And maybe tonight someone listening to this story feels exactly the way that man once felt. Maybe you have been fighting the same battle and quietly wondering if God is becoming tired of hearing your prayers. But if your heart still hates the sin and still longs to return to God, then the story is not finished yet. The struggle does not mean you are abandoned. Sometimes it simply means the work inside your heart is still continuing. So tonight, instead of giving up, simply take one quiet step back toward God again. And if this message spoke to your heart, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need this encouragement, and subscribe so we can continue walking this journey of faith together.